Hello everyone and welcome to my GH Full channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. On that fateful afternoon, suspense permeated the crowded corridors of General Hospital in Port Charles as Dr. Portia Robinson sat in her office, her hands quivering slightly over a manila package that had just been handed. The previous few months had been a blur of secrets, betrayals, and unforeseen twists that no one could have anticipated. Portia, once so confident in her job as a recognized physician and dedicated mother to Trina, was now inched in a web of her own creation. Her marriage to Curtis Ashford had imploded under the weight of revelations. First, her long-hidden affair years before, which called Trina's paternity into question, and now this unexpected pregnancy, which brought even more uncertainty. It all started innocently enough. Or so Portia told herself in the quiet times when remorse set in. Portia had sought solace in the arms of Dr. Isaiah Gainan, a charming and sympathetic colleague who had recently joined the medical staff following a tumultuous period with Curtis in which conflicts about trust and past deception had strained their relationship. Their connection was immediate, driven by late-night shifts and mutual difficulties with challenging patients. After a particularly stressful day, they succumbed to their passion in a Metro Court hotel room. The same night, Drew Cain was shot, giving Portia an unknowing alibi that eventually exploded in court during Willow Take's trial. Prior to that night, Portia and Curtis had temporarily reignited their romance in an attempt to save their marriage. Portia learned she was pregnant weeks later, which blurred the boundaries of paternity. Elizabeth Baldwin suggested a pregnancy test when Portia complained of dizziness and nausea at work, and the positive result turned her world upside down. She confided in few people. Ava Jerome became an unusual ally, offering advice tinged with her own cynical outlook, while Portia kept the potential twin fathers hidden from practically everyone. Curtis assumed the baby was his, overjoyed at the possibility of finally having a kid he could raise from the start. Unlike Trina, who he had missed for so many years due to Portia's past deceptions, Isaiah was startled but hopeful when he learned of the pregnancy amid a health scare that placed Portia in the emergency room, where stress over Curtis's prospective legal difficulties and uncertain paternity forced her to collapse. He inquired bluntly if he could be the father, and Portia's hesitating "you could be" just added to his increasing bond. Britt Westbourne, who was temporarily assisting with Portia's care despite her own career dilemma, witnessed the raw emotion and played an important role in settling the situation. Isaiah wanted to be involved, envisioning a future with Portia and the kid, whilst Curtis advocated for reconciliation, hoping the baby could reconcile their broken family. As the weeks progressed into December, the pressure increased. Curtis, now separated but still deeply invested, insisted on a paternity test after the first trimester, not wanting to be caught off guard again like he had been with Trina. Portia initially resisted, focusing on repairing her connection with Trina, who was devastated by the courtroom revelation of her mother's affair. Trina had walked away in tears after learning the truth in the most public way possible. Portia was forced to admit under oath during the trial that she was with Isaiah on the night of the shooting. Curtis confronted her immediately after, demanding to know if the baby was actually his. Portia's sobbing admission that she didn't know crushed him, forcing him to seek solace from his ex-wife, Jordan Ashford, while Portia relied more on Isaiah. Rumors circulated around the hospital, and Brad Cooper, always on the lookout for leverage, implied that he knew more than he should, possibly regarding Portia's previous lab tampering with Heather Weber's results. Drew Cain, who was furious over his own tragedies and perceived flights from the Ashfords, was suspected by some of interfering if he learned about the test. But tired of falsehoods, Portia eventually agreed to the paternity test. Samples were collected discreetly. Curtis gladly, Isaiah, with a mix of eagerness and worry, and Portia under the cautious scrutiny of the lab techs. The day the findings were ready, arrived on a crisp winter morning shortly before New Year's Eve. Portia had booked a private meeting with the doctor in charge of the test. A neutral party from an outside lab to eliminate any hospital prejudice. Curtis and Isaiah both wanted to go, but Portia insisted on hearing the news alone first, pledging to share it shortly thereafter. Her heart hammered as she approached the small consulting room, the fluorescent lights glaring in her exhausted eyes. She had scarcely slept, troubled by possibilities. If it was Curtis, they might be able to recover. If it was Isaiah's, a new life beckoned, but at the expense of grieving Curtis and isolating Trina even more. The doctor, a pleasant-looking elderly woman with glasses perched on her nose, slowly opened the envelope, scanning the document before looking up. "Dr. Robinson, the paternity test results are conclusive," she said calmly but compassionately. Portia clutched the armrest of the chair, her breath caught. The doctor waited to ensure Portia was ready before continuing. "The biological father of the child is Dr. Isaiah Gainan." The words hit Portia like a tidal wave. Isaiah, not Curtis, the man she had turned to in a time of weakness. The one who symbolized a new beginning, but also the termination of all remaining hope for her marriage. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from excitement, but from tremendous anguish at what this represented. Curtis would be shattered. He had already fallen in love with the notion of this baby, seeing it as a form of forgiveness for the years he had missed with Trina. Trina may consider it as another betrayal. Evidence that her mother favored transitory pleasures over family stability. And what about Isaiah? He would be overjoyed. But Portia wasn't sure she was prepared to truly embrace that future. Her eyesight faded as reality set in. The room appeared to whirl and the doctor's anxious voice faded into a faraway murmur. "Dr. Robinson, are you okay?" But Portia couldn't react. The emotional weight, months of secrets, public humiliation in court, pressure on her relationships, all came crashing down at once. Her body went limp, her eyes fluttering shut as she slumped forward and fainted right in the chair. The doctor immediately called for nurses and checked Portia's vitals. "She's stable, just overwhelmed." Likely a vasovagal response from the stress, the doctor told the frantic staff. They relocated her to an adjacent exam room and used ultrasound to confirm the baby's safety. The heartbeat was robust, a slight relief in the midst of pandemonium. The word traveled swiftly through the hospital grapevine. Isaiah was paged first, coming breathless and concerned, only to learn the outcome as he sat by her bedside. His face brightened up with relief and delight, and he softly took her hand as she began to stir. "It's ours," he said softly when her eyelids opened, his voice heavy with emotion. "The baby is ours." Portia forced a feeble grin as tears spilled down her cheeks. Joy for Isaiah clashed with regret at what had been lost. Curtis arrived shortly afterwards, having been identified as the suspected father. He stopped at the doorway, saw Isaiah by her side, and figured it out before anyone talked. The pain in his eyes was evident, and the despair was deep. "It's not mine," he stated plainly without question. Portia simply nodded, unable to form words. Curtis turned away, his shoulders dropped, and the prospect of fatherhood slipped away again. Jordan could be there for him, but the wound was fresh. Trina learned later via a heartbreaking call from Portia after she was discharged home. The conversation was tight, Trina's rage simmering underneath forgiveness she wasn't ready to give. "How could you let this happen again, Mom?" she asked, repeating her pain from previous lies. Portia had no defense, only apologies that were hollow. In the days that followed, as Port Charles prepared for New Year's celebrations, Portia's life changed irreversibly. Isaiah stepped up, supportive and kind, and began planning their family's future together. He offered moving in together, discussing names and nurseries with zeal that both warmed and overwhelmed Portia. She admired his stability in contrast to Curtis's erratic behavior. Yet remorse lingered. Late at night, she pondered if she had unconsciously longed for this conclusion. A clean slate to begin over without the shadows of previous mistakes. Curtis pushed himself into work and relied on friends. His relationship with Jordan developing into something more romantic. The sadness drove his will to move forward. But the death of the baby he believed was his tormented him. He paid frequent visits to Trina, cementing their father-daughter bond, determined not to allow Portia's decisions define his role in her life. Ava, ever the confidante, brought Portia a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider for the holidays. "You got your answer," Ava stated pragmatically. "Now live with it. Isaiah is a good man. He'll be a good father." Portia nodded, knowing the truth. But the shift was difficult. The faint in the doctor's office became a watershed moment, a physical manifestation of her emotional breakdown and rebirth. As the clock hit midnight on New Year's Eve, Portia stood on her balcony, hand on her swelling tummy, watching fireworks illuminate the sky. Isaiah joined her and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "This is our year," he mumbled. Portia leaned into him, mumbling assent, while a part of her lamented the family that might have been. Life in Port Charles was never easy. Secrets had a way of changing everything. But in that moment, with the baby gently kicking, she gave herself a glimpse of optimism. The consequences spread throughout the hospital and beyond. Britt, who aided during Portia's last scare, found redemption in her acts, bringing her closer to obtaining her medical license. Brad lurked in the shadows, possibly trying to profit from previous knowledge, but for the time being, the focus was on the newly formed family. Drew's courtroom dramas faded into the background, and his personal vendettas took a backseat to greater revelations. Portia's fading signaled the conclusion of one chapter and the start of another. She had confronted the reality full-on, even if it knocked her unconscious. Raising this child with Isaiah would present challenges. Co-parenting discussions with Curtis if necessary, healing ties with Trina, but also delight. The DNA findings announced in that silent room had changed everything, forcing Portia to confront her decisions and embrace the future. Months later, as her due date approached, Portia thought about that day frequently. The faint wasn't caused by shock. It was a release, her body giving way to the inevitable. In the end, the baby, a healthy boy named after Isaiah's father, brought brightness into the darkness. Curtis found peace and soon began a new chapter with Jordan. Trina softened over time, bonding with her half-sibling. And Portia, she realized that the truth, however terrible, was the only way ahead. Portia Robinson's pregnancy story became legendary in Port Charles circles, telling of love, betrayal, and forgiveness. From the announcement that left her faint to the cries of her newborn son, it was a voyage of deep change. In the world of General Hospital, where lives intermingled in spectacular ways, Portia's narrative reminded everyone that the most devastating news may lead to the most powerful starts. The room became strangely quiet, as if the machines lined the walls had decided to hold their breath. Portia stood rigid at the foot of the bed, one palm braced against the metal rail and the other protectively held against her chest. Her gaze was fixated on the doctor's face, looking for something. Reassurance, confirmation, anything to soften the words she had just heard. The doctor cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable. He peered down at the chart and back up, as if hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves if he looked twice. "The DNA test is conclusive," he explained cautiously. "The baby's biological father is not who we initially believed." Portia remained silent for a short second. Her face relaxed, her lips parted slightly, and her eyes became glazed with amazement. Curtis, who stood next to her, felt the movement before he noticed it. He stretched out impulsively, but he arrived too late. Portia's knees buckled. The environment shifted, the clean white walls blending together as the sound drained from her ears. The last thing she noticed was Curtis' sudden intake of breath when he called her name. Then darkness swept in quick and cruel, and Portia sank to the floor. "Portia." Curtis went to his knees next to her, cradling her head as nurses raced in. Alarms rang, footsteps echoed, and the room was filled with movement and haste. Someone checked her pulse. Another barked orders. Curtis scarcely registered any of it. His gaze was fixed on Portia's pale and still face, her lashes laying too lightly against her cheeks. "Get her on the gurney," a nurse instructed. Now across the room, Trina stood paralyzed, her heart thumping so hard she felt her ribs would shatter. One moment she was bracing herself for devastating news, and the next her mother was asleep on the floor. "Mom," she muttered, her voice shaking. Taggart approached Trina with a steadying hand. "Mom, please." His jaw was clenched and his eyes were filled with concern and wrath. "She'll be fine," he murmured, but the words seemed frail even as he spoke them. The doctor who had delivered the results appeared frightened. He wasn't used to this kind of reaction or this level of emotional repercussions. "We'll take her to a room and monitor her vitals," he told me. "She likely fainted from shock, but we need to be sure." Shockingly, as Portia was carried out of the room, Curtis heard the term resonate in his thoughts. Shock does not even begin to cover it. His thoughts rushed back over the previous weeks, recalling the stress, questions, and worry that had settled in his gut long before the test results arrived. He had suspected something was wrong. He'd felt it, but knowing that and saying it aloud were two entirely different things. The door slid shut behind the gurney, leaving Trina, Curtis, and Taggart struck silent. For a moment, no one spoke. "What does that mean?" Trina finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did the doctor mean?" Curtis stared at her, saw the dread and confusion in her eyes, and his heart twisted terribly. He wanted to shelter her to keep her from knowing the truth for a little longer. But the truth eventually came out, whether anyone was ready for it or not. "It means," Taggart remarked slowly and bitterly, "that someone hasn't been honest." Curtis gave him a piercing look. "This isn't the time." "When is it?" Taggart snapped. "My daughter deserves answers." "We all do." Trina's worry grew as her eyes moved between the two men. "Dad, Curtis, please just tell me what is going on." Curtis sighed deeply. "The DNA test was meant to confirm the baby's paternity," he told me. "To clear up questions." Trina pushed. "And it didn't confirm what we expected," he explained. The implications came over her slowly, like a cold running down her spine. "So, who is the father?" Curtis paused. "We do not know yet. Not for sure." But even as he spoke it, a name burned in his mind, unheard and frightening. Portia's eyes opened at a different wing of General Hospital. The bright lights assailed her senses, and she whimpered softly, her head pounding. She attempted to move, only to have a hard yet kind hand force her shoulder back against the bed. "Easy," a nurse replied. "You fainted." Portia gulped, her throat dry. Memories flooded back. The doctor's remarks, the test results, the way the room had spun. Her chest constricted terribly. "The baby," she muttered. The nurse looked at the neighboring doctor and said, "The results?" "You're stable right now," the doctor said. "But your blood pressure soared and then dropped abruptly. You need to rest." "I can't," Portia replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand." "Oh, we know more than you think," the doctor said kindly. "But you need to stay calm." Portia laughed shakily, bordering on hysteria. "Come?" The word seemed like a terrible joke. Her carefully crafted universe had just shattered, and there was no way to reassemble the fragments. Curtis entered the room moments later. His face filled with relief and horror as he saw her awake. He dragged a chair up to the bed and sat down, taking her hand in his, her fingers twitched on his flesh. "I'm so sorry," she muttered, her tears streaming freely now. "I never wanted this." Curtis closed his eyes briefly to collect his thoughts. "Portia," he murmured quietly. "We need to talk." She shook her head, panic on her face. "Not yet. Please, I can't." "The truth is already out there," he stated quietly. "And fainting didn't make it go away." Portia averted her gaze, glancing at the wall. "I was scared," she admitted after a lengthy pause. "I'm scared of what it might signify. I'm afraid of losing everything." Curtis leaned forward, losing everything over a lie. Her quiet sufficed as a response. Trina strode along the hall, arms curled around herself. Every scenario played out in her thoughts, each more terrifying than the previous. She felt like a small girl again, caught up in something much beyond her power. When Curtis exited from Portia's room, Trina dashed toward him. "How is she doing?" "She's awake," he replied. "Resting?" And she inquired. "What did she say?" Curtis paused. Trina frowned. "She's processing." "That isn't an answer." He agreed. "It's not inside the room." Portia stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She had spent years defending her actions, convinced herself that she had done all required to protect her family. But when confronted with the consequences, such reasons rang hollow. The baby, the secret. She had buried the facts so thoroughly that she nearly believed her own version of events. A knock on the door made her flinch. Taggart walked inside, his look unreadable. He shut the door behind him, a click reverberating in the strained calm. So he said calmly, "I heard the DNA test had something to say." Portia swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt anyone." "That's funny," Taggart said, his voice tense because that appears to be exactly what happened. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw the pain carved into his features. "I tried to protect Trina by lying." He shot back. "By leading me to believe something that was not true." Tears ran down her face. Taggart laughed angrily. "I was afraid. We are all terrified, Portia. The difference is that some of us don't change the reality to make ourselves feel better." His comments crushed her. For the first time, Portia allowed herself to consider what would come next. The backlash, the rage, the broken trust. Trina would want answers. Curtis would want honesty. And the man whose name she had avoided thinking about will undoubtedly be drawn into the turmoil. Back in the waiting room, Trina glanced at the hospital doors, her mind racing. She felt the ground move beneath her, the foundation of her life crumbling in ways she couldn't quite grasp. All she knew was that the truth will be revealed whether she was prepared or not. And somewhere within General Hospital, the echoes of a single announcement continued to reverberate, touching lives, revealing secrets, and laying the groundwork for a reckoning that no one could avoid.